Bonjour et bienvenue dans cette leçon de français. Aujourd'hui, on va parler au sujet du conditionnel. Hello, welcome to this French video lesson. We're going to be looking in this video at how to use the French conditional tense. On y va. Let's go. Les objectifs de cette leçon sont comprendre ce qui est le conditionnel et quand on l'utilise, pouvoir conjuguer des verbes réguliers au conditionnel, et être conscient de certains verbes irréguliers clés. So the objectives of this lesson are to understand what the conditional tense is and when we have to use it, to be able to conjugate regular verbs in the conditional, and to be aware of certain key irregular verbs. La première question c'est quoi le conditionnel? So our first question is, what is the conditional tense? The conditional tense is used in a similar way to how we use it in English to express hypothetical ideas. So every time you use a word like would, could, or should in English, this is the conditional tense. Just pause the video and have a think of some example phrases in English where you use words like would, could, or should, and then when you're ready, push play. Okay, so you might have thought, if I won the lottery, I would buy myself a big house and a brand new sports car. I could go on holiday to the Caribbean whenever I want, and I should give some money to my family. La deuxième question c'est quand est-il utilisé? So our second question is, when is it used? It's used every time you want to express the idea that someone would, could, or should do something, or that something would, could, or should happen. So whenever you use those words in a sentence in English to express that same idea in French, you would be using the conditional tense. I'm going to give you some examples now to put this into context a bit more. Par exemple, je voyagerai à Paris. I would travel to Paris. So not I will travel, I'm going to travel, but I would travel. It's this idea that it's a hypothetical scenario. Possibly there's a condition where this would happen. For example, if I had enough money, I would travel to Paris. Another example, je pourrais appeler mon ami. I could call my friend. It's not saying that I'm going to or that I will, just that I could. Je devrais étudier plus. I should study more. Not the same as I must study more, which sounds a bit more urgent and I've got to do it, but I should. I should study more, but I'm not going to. So we should now understand what the conditional tense is and when to use it. And our next step is to be able to conjugate regular verbs in the conditional tense. La troisième question c'est comment est-il conjugué? How is it conjugated? Now, just like the future tense, you keep your infinitive verbs. You don't remove the er, ir, or re ending. You just keep the whole verb, or you remove the e for re verbs, and then you add your conditional endings. So just like the future tense, we don't have to take anything away from the infinitive, like we do for, let's say, the present tense, or the passé composé, or the imperfect tense. So for example, if our infinitive is écouter, to listen, instead of taking off that er, we just leave it there. Then we add the conditional ending. So j'écouterai, I would listen. The conditional endings are exactly the same as the imperfect endings. So that's great news if you already know your imperfect tense, because there's nothing new to learn. You just use the infinitive and then you add your imperfect endings. So let's go through those. We've got AIS, AIS, AIT, IONS, IEZ, AIENT. And with that one, the ENT is silent, like in the present tense. So it sounds like the je and the tu and the il, elle, on form. For example, j'écouterai, tu écouterais, il écouterait, elle écouterait, on écouterait, il, elle, in the plural form, écouterait. We don't need to hear that ENT. Another good bit of news is that the endings are all the same for all of the different verbs. The same as in the future tense, you don't have one set for ER, one set for IR, another set for RE. It's the same ending. So the ones we just looked at, which is the same for the imperfect tense, we just use those with all of our ER verbs like jouer, all of our IR verbs like finir, and then our RE verbs like vendre. The only thing we need to change with the RE verbs is we drop that final E off of the infinitive, just because all of our endings start in a vowel having an E and then an A, it just doesn't work. So we just need to remember to get rid of that E if we're using RE verbs. So if the conditional and imperfect endings are exactly the same, isn't that a bit confusing? How do we know whether a verb is in the imperfect or if it's in the conditional? Well, though the two tenses use exactly the same endings, what makes them different is whether or not we remove the ER, IR, or the RE ending from the infinitive. So these are our endings, those don't change, but there are differences. So for example, with the verb regarder, to watch, in the imperfect we drop that ER, then we'd add our ending. So in the je form, we'll look at some examples just in the je form. Je regardais, I used to watch, or I was watching. Whereas in the conditional, we keep the ER. Je regarderai. Okay, so it's got that extra bit in there. So if we see those two words, all we need to look at, first if we see the ending, and we think, okay, AIS. Because it's an AIS ending, that can only be conditional or imperfect. But does it have the ending? Does it have the ER? If it doesn't, it's imperfect. If it does, it's conditional. So that's the way you can work out the meaning of words and work out whether it's I used to do such and such or I would do such and such. For example, jouer, get rid of the ER. Je jouais, I used to play or I was playing. Je jouerai, I would play. Écouter, j'écoutais, I used to listen or I was listening. J'écouterai, I would listen. So you just need to be careful about, just look out for, is the ending there? If not, it's imperfect. If it is, it's conditional. And the same when you want to use it in your speaking and writing, the conditional one, it's going to have the ending. When you're speaking, it's going to have that extra syllable. Regarder, regarderai. Jouer, jouerai. Écouter, écouterai. Maintenant, on va pratiquer. So now we're going to do a little bit of practice. So first you just need to keep the verb in its infinitive form with its ending, remembering just to drop that final E if it's an RE one, and then you add one of the following endings, which are the same for all verbs and exactly the same endings we use for the imperfect. So AIS, AIS, AIT, IONS, IEZ, AIENT. Here we've got some verbs with different people doing the verb, so you just need to look at which ending you're going to put on the end of the infinitive basically. The only RE verb is prendre, to take, and I've already dropped the E, so you don't need to worry about that one. Just go through, conjugate these, try reading them out loud, saying them to yourself, think about what they mean, and when you're ready, push play, and we'll go through. Okay, on y va, let's go. Je danserai, I would dance. Vous regarderiez, you plural would watch, or you formal would watch. Elle prendrait, she would take. Ils mangeraient, they would eat. Tu écouterais, you would listen. Nous choisirions. Nous choisirions, we would choose. So we should now be able to conjugate regular verbs in the conditional. Our next step is to be aware of some key irregular verbs. In terms of irregular verbs, they're the exact same ones with the exact same irregular stems as the future tense. So if you've seen my video on the future tense, you might already know these. So there are a number of irregular verbs in the conditional tense, and what makes them irregular isn't that they have a different ending, it's that they have a different stem that we use instead of the infinitive. The endings we use are perfectly regular. They're the same ones we've been looking at, the same ones we use with the imperfect. So here we have some of the key, most high frequency irregular verbs in the conditional tense. Aller, to go, we can't say j'allerai, we have to say j'irai, I would go. We can't say j'avoirai, I would have, we have to use an irregular stem AUR, so we say j'aurais, I would have. Être, to be, we say je serais, I would be. Si je gagnais à la loterie, if I won the lottery, je serais riche, I would be rich. Faire, to do or to make, je ferais, I would do. Je pourrais, I would be able to, so we can use a different infinitive after that, like je pourrais aller sur la lune. I would be able to go to the moon. Devoir, to must, to have to do something. Je devrais means I should do something. Je devrais faire mes devoirs. I should do my homework. Je voudrais, probably you know this one because even though you haven't looked at the conditional tense before explicitly, One of the first things you learn when you learn French is to say, I would like a coffee. Je voudrais un café. Voir, je verrai. I would see. Now we're going to look at the conditional and the imperfect again, not to look at conditional versus imperfect like we did before, but to look at how these are used in unison, how they're used together. So the imperfect and the conditional tenses are often used together to talk about what you would do given a certain condition. For example, if I won the lottery, I would such and such. So this often takes the form of what's called an if clause, which is in the imperfect, followed by a verb in the conditional. So let's look at some examples. Our if clause could be si je pouvais, if I could, followed by something in the conditional. Si je pouvais, je regarderais la télé toute la nuit. If I could, I would watch TV all night long. Si j'étais riche, if I were rich or if I was rich, j'irais sur la lune avec SpaceX. If I were rich, I would go to the moon with SpaceX. Si je gagnais à la loterie, if I won the lottery, in the imperfect tense, followed by the conditional tense, j'achèterais une grande maison et j'aurais une piscine. I would buy a big house and I would have a swimming pool. So that should give you an idea of how you can use the conditional in context with an if clause in the imperfect tense. And also just a bit of a reminder to look at, in the conditional column, I've put in bold the ER ending on regarder and acheter to remind us that in the conditional we need to keep those endings. If we don't, if we take them off and then we add the AIS, what we're creating is the imperfect tense, not the conditional tense. So we'll be saying something completely different. Instead of I would watch TV, we'd be saying I used to watch TV. And that brings us to the end of this video lesson. Merci d'avoir regardé. Thank you for watching. So the next steps you might want to take are to practice conjugating regular verbs in the conditional tense. There are lots of really high frequency, really useful ER verbs. Write down the ones you use the most or the ones you want to use. Practice conjugating them into the conditional tense, not just in the je form, but in the other forms as well. And learn the irregular verb stems for the conditional. Because not only will they help you use the conditional tense, they're also the same ones you use for the simple future. So learning the ir, or, those irregular stems for aller, for être, for avoir, they're going to be super useful for you to then say j'irai, I would go, or j'irai, I will go, and they'll really expand the variety of language you can use when you're speaking and writing French.